Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hi, I'm Flight Lieutenant Chris Sully and welcome to the latest RAF Inside Air podcast. In this week's episode, we're off to Texas for RAF fighter pilot training.
One of our strengths in comparison to other pilot training bases was the expert instruction. And we attribute a lot of that to the international partners who bring that experience to our program.
I think it's fair to say the scale of daily operations here is incomparable to anything else I've ever experienced.
Those links that we forge here, because I can guarantee I'll still be in touch with my classmates, potentially one day could be incredibly valuable.
As you might expect, we'll also reheat a few stories you might have missed out on, and we'll be finding out who's under the hat this week with AS1 Ben Russell.
Best location you've served?
Oh, that's 20 Squadron Harrier OCU at RAF Wittering. I was lucky enough to get a couple of backseat flights in the T-10s. Unbelievable experience while I was there for 3 years.
Did you know that the RAF sends some of its trainee pilots to the United States to learn to be fighter pilots? Inside Air's Wing Commander Dylan Eklund headed to the Lone Star State to get the lowdown.
Hi, I'm Wing Commander Dylan Eklund. I'm in Texas to meet some of the RAF personnel based here in the Lone Star State as part of a unique NATO flying training program. It's fair to say that Texas is the home of US military flying training. At a number of bases across the state, student pilots start their journey to become fighter pilots. One of these, Shepherd Air Force Base near the Oklahoma border, is however quite different, for it hosts the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training System, or ENJJPT for short, which has been training students from NATO allied nations for over 40 years. In the UK, we have our own flying training system, of course. So I've come to Shepherd to find out how this multinational enterprise works, why we send pilots here to train, and what it's like for the instructors and students living and flying such a long way from home. The first thing that hits you at Shepherd is the sheer scale of the base. Its main role is to train engineers and maintainers, and like its RAF equivalent of RAF Cosford, the station is home to a number of retired aircraft for students to work on. The pan at Shepherd is a little different though. Here we have F-15s, F-16s, and over there a couple of B-52s. On the adjacent airfield are row upon row of training aircraft, propeller-driven Texan II similar to those operated at RAF Valley, and venerable T-38 Talon jets which have been fulfilling a training role for the Americans since the early 60s. Those who fly these aircraft, whether as students or instructors, come from the 14 different NATO nations who participate in ENJJPTs. And first I met one of the RAF students currently in the T-38 phase of her training.
Hello, my name is Flight Lieutenant Tabs. I'm an English student on T-38s at Shepherd Air Force Base with ENJJPT.
Tell us a little bit about your Air Force career to date.
Of course, so I joined in January 2018, straight out of sixth form college. I went through IOT. I then had a period of holding. I did my elementary flying training course at Cromwell at the end of 2020 into 21. Got streamed from that towards the fast jet track, and then through a series of events was scheduled to go to Valley. Having had that position, some things changed in the flying training scheme of manoeuvres, and I ended up being offered a spot here for T6 and T38 and started here 2023.
What were your first impressions when you got here?
It's very different to the UK flying system. I had a fair few courses with MFTS, so their method of teaching is very different, as well as the scale. You only have to look on Google Earth and you can see the sheds. There's many, many aircraft here, and the turnover is very high. The weather is different. I think all the Brits would agree. The heat is a different factor that you might not think of, but it gets very hot. And then just the way the courses is run, the turnover rate, as I already mentioned, is very impressive. And in order to achieve that, the pace is quite high. The weather allows for that, which is fantastic. We usually get very good flying conditions, even if it is very warm for us. And then the method as well. I think UK MFTS, from my experience, is very much structured. You know which each lesson is, you know how that works. Here, as a student, the emphasis is put on you to design your flights for what you want to focus on. It's almost like instead of giving you ladder rungs as such, which I was used to. So we build to something. This, they kind of just show you the whole ladder and you kind of get good at everything as you go. So it's a very different way of teaching and coaching. And then the biggest thing for me was internationals as well. I lived in the dorms as did most of the internationals, and I was in a quad with Italians and Germans and Dutch. We'd get together in the evenings, and it's just a bit different. Sat around a table hearing, 3 or 4 different languages, which is pretty cool and a great way of making some friends, some colleagues, seeing how their Air Force functions, their atmospherics, and then bringing that into how they've trained to get here as well and what their steps are afterwards.
So why did you join the Air Force?
Good question. There were 2 things that really attracted me to it. One was I'd kind of finished, I enjoy education and learning things, but I'd kind of finished with that thing and I wanted to go and do something at 18. Admittedly, it took me an extra year to get through the process, but I didn't really want to go to university. I didn't know what I'd study if I did. And I really liked getting out and about and doing adventures. I'm a sailor from my family, so I'd done some big blue water sailing, and I thought the appeal of not only the Air Force life, but the extras that come with it. So the AT, the ability to have work colleagues that then become friends and you can go and do things with. Plus, my great-grandfather was in the Air Force and he had some fantastic stories and just really enjoyed the life. And it's something I'd just been interested in for a while. So thought I'd give it a go.
So was it specifically being a pilot then?
Not particularly. To be honest, the being a pilot was almost a happy surprise. I was pretty good academically, but nothing, stellar. I didn't have any hours before I did EFT. I'd flown, maybe a couple in little city planes as birthday presents and stuff, but nothing particularly that showed that was a thing I could do. I was an air cadet, all the gliders were broken and everything was wrong, so I didn't get much flying, but the aptitude test went well. I really enjoyed EFT, and that sort of steered the decision from there. Sorry, elementary flying training.
And so far, how's the experience been?
It's been great. It's been two sets of experiences. One is the flying training side, and the other is all the other aspects that have happened in between. So the various positions I've held in between there. On the one hand, really good for getting a very good cross section of RAF life as such. That's not just flying, and then the training aspect, I'm still in. So I'm aware that that's a different atmosphere to frontline flying or squadrons. Both been very enjoyable, both very different. The pressures in the training system, especially here with pace, and it's pretty relentless. We haven't stopped since last March, which is awesome, but different to having a course and then going into a job that's, you're qualified for, but it's different. And then you have to flip back to that training mentality. I've enjoyed both. I've been really lucky to have some good opportunities in both. And I'm curious to see how they mesh once I am qualified and on a squadron, so that kind of becomes one entity as opposed to sort of 2 separate experiences.
Tell me a little bit about your flying training. So you started on Texan and then through to T-38. So tell me about that process.
Yeah, so we're very lucky in the UK. First off, the Prefect is a fantastic airplane. The glass cockpit's really good. It's got loads of brilliant tools to help you gain situational awareness of what's happening. And then coming here is a little bit different. So the T6 also a really good, capable airplane. Very reliable engine, which we always love. And the avionics suite is good for what it needs to do. It's a little bit different. We don't have the moving map that we had on Prefect, so getting back to some basics there. And it has some classic, it's got a massive propeller on the front, so it's got some fun characteristics. But very, very capable. And more importantly, the amount of them they have here means that it's a very good rate of flying. 38 is also different. She's a piece of excellent engineering from several decades ago. So in some ways very elegant, and some others kind of slightly amusing. The new cockpit in it is fantastic. Flying instruments in this thing is fantastic. The way you learn to use the systems, they emphasize very early, and we have some desktop trainers we can use, which is good. And especially now that we're in slightly further through the course, being able to actually employ all those things that are there to help you. You just don't necessarily know how to use them at the start. Is really cool. The fact that it's twin-engined is, I think, really valuable, especially looking forward, potentially the Typhoon route. It's a slightly different mindset when it comes to dealing with potential emergencies. And Afterburner is wonderful. Definitely biased for that's pretty good fun. And the HUD is fantastic. Valley, yes, the HUD and the T6 I think would have been awesome here as well, just because it's a bit more of a jump, but it's very helpful. And once you get used to it, it's very intuitive. And then you miss it when they put you in the back seat for instruments.
And what do your family and friends think about you being on the route to become a fighter pilot?
It's kind of funny. My sister, when I went home for Christmas, because we didn't go home for 9 months. When I did go home for Christmas, my middle sister pretty summed me up. She said, "Oh my gosh, yes, you do exist. You just disappear sometimes, and then you come back and tell us about all these crazy things." My mum came out to visit, as did my dad, and they were equally impressed with the sort of scale. And they were watching the jets go over, and the little snippets from. We can take tapes, so the jet will record everything we do. And you can watch it back after to analyze. And when my dad came to visit, I showed him some clips on that. It's all open source. And yeah, I think it sort of hammers home a little bit what you're doing. Equally, dropping the, dad's interested to, what are the parameters for a loop, for example. I went, oh, okay, so 500 knots, it takes 10,000 feet. He does a bit of clacking. And it's like, okay, so the cruising speed of a jet. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. So I think they are sometimes surprised, especially at the pace here. It's very busy. The time difference is a pain, but ultimately, I think they're happy that I'm enjoying it. And equally, I think we're all quite excited that headed towards the end of 38. So it'll be nice to get back to the UK.
And have you seen much of the States?
Yes, especially in the last part of last year, we get the federal holidays here, and they tend to add on a family day, so the long weekends. It's not like a block of leave or anything. It's almost like a bank holiday. But I managed to get out and do most of the West Coast in a couple of hops. We went up to Ohio for Centrifuge, cross countries, been to Chicago, and then down to Eggland, down in Florida. And I think that's a really important part, actually. The way the cross countries work here is you can take a jet into their jet airways and you will go. The continental US is huge. And with the fuel ranges of the T6, you can really get some places. And 38s is not bad either. And that's pretty impressive and a big confidence boost. And then I had a week between T6 and T38. So we went up to Oregon and drove down to San Francisco. So ticking off some cities.
One final question. And tell me a little bit about the international element to this. And because you said, that was one of the things that attracted you to come here. How does that sort of work out on a professional and personal basis?
I've found it to be really valuable. Like I said, living with various nationalities is interesting. They all operate slightly differently. The Italian pasta parties were great, and they were very welcoming. Instructors, I think it's really valuable. I could fly in a 4-ship and there could be 8 different nationalities conceivably. That brings its challenges, so potential with language and all that stuff. But typically speaking, it's always enriching. Equally, people are always in the flight room. So I've had the chance to talk to Norwegians about how they do business, and the Germans about how they do their flying training system. And it also adds an element of context. We have CAPES briefs, so capability briefs from all the different nations, and it adds a level of why do we do NATO, if that makes sense, especially when, we can talk to the Romanian students about their climate, if you will, and why we are here training as a single entity almost, and why we need standardization. And those links that we forge here, because I can guarantee I'll still be in touch with my classmates, potentially one day could be incredibly valuable. And we have a common language almost of at least one way of doing business.
It was a real pleasure talking to Tabs. Fast jet flying is a complex endeavour. It demands a combination of mental dexterity, concentration, physical fitness, and a lot of determination to succeed. All students will have varying strengths and weaknesses, and it forces the instructors to strike the right balance to ensure students are able to fulfil their potential. The team of instructors at Shepherd come from all the 14 ENJJPT nations, and so have a variety of backgrounds. The UK senior representative is a former Tornado GR4 pilot, squadron leader Guy Gibbons.
I'm squadron leader Guy Gibbons. I'm the UK senior national representative at the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training School at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas.
What is ENJJPT?
The Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training School is a coalition of NATO member countries who, over its history, 40 years or so, have collectively delivered fast jet flying training together. So it's hosted by the 80th Flying Training Wing, which is a unit in the United States Air Force, but it is not a United States school. It is a partnership of NATO countries, so it is an entirely shared responsibility program. Here at Shepherd, we deliver phase 1 to 4 flying training. So what that means is the students, or an ab initio student that arrives here, is delivered an academic package consisting of a number of different disciplines, but basics of how an aircraft flies, weather, human performance, instrumentation, things like that. They'll then conduct a broadly 8-month-long undergraduate pilot training course on the T6, which is similar but slightly different to the T6 that we have in the UK, and that comprises the basics of how to fly an aeroplane. So they'll learn to fly. They'll then learn to fly in instrument conditions, so in cloud, flying instrument approaches. They'll then learn to start to fly the aircraft in a bit more of an applied manner. So they'll learn to do more advanced aerobatics, low-level and formation flying. On successful completion of that course, they'll then graduate to fly the T-38 to go through the undergraduate pilot training course on the T-38. The T-38 UPT course is fairly similar in structure to the T-6, but they're now doing it at 2.5 times the speed in a very different aircraft. So the T-6 being a straight-wing propeller-driven training aircraft. The T-38 itself is an old aircraft, but it was designed to replicate a fighter-type aircraft. So it's a small, swept-wing supersonic aircraft, and its handling characteristics are notably different to the T-6. So again, on the T-38 course, they'll do the basics of how to fly the aircraft, but then more rapidly they'll move into the more applied phase. So we'll do more formation flying as a 2-ship, and they'll then start flying as a 4-ship with 2 students led by 2 instructors in separate aircraft as well. Towards the end of the course, we'll do more low-level flying, and then we'll start to introduce some tactical use of the aircraft. So we'll do just the first building block towards using the aircraft as a weapons system with some air-to-air engagements. Following that, the students will graduate and receive their US Air Force wings before going on to Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, which is the final phase of training delivered here at Shepherd. RFF is a step change in the pace and focus of how the training is delivered and what the focus is. They'll go from learning to fly the aircraft to learning to use the aircraft as a weapons system. So they'll conduct air-to-air training, air-to-surface training as a 2-ship and a 4-ship formation. They'll start to train for close air support, like we delivered on operations in the past, and they'll start to deliver air-to-ground weaponry. On successful completion of this course, the students, say from the 14 partner nations, will then go off either back to their respective nations, or some stay in the US to fly their frontline aircraft type. So as a Royal Air Force student graduating from IFF, you would then be assigned back to the UK to fly either the Typhoon or the F-35B as your next assignment.
So from a practical perspective, on a day-to-day basis, how does it work?
So the program operates in a nation-agnostic manner on a day-to-day basis. So using myself as an example, obviously as a UK national in the Royal Air Force, I could go and fly in a 4-ship with 7 different people from 7 different nations, and it would make no difference, which country a student I was flying with came from, and the British students on the course, they could be supervised by a German flight commander, working for an Italian squadron commander, working for a Turkish military training officer. It's day to day. The flag that we wear makes no difference to the training. Obviously, we all like flying with our own nationality. I enjoy flying with the Brit students, but equally I enjoy flying with the students from other nations as well. And it's one of the, if not to me, the standout benefit of ENJJPT is the relationships that are built here. So most of the other European air forces are of a similar size to the Royal Air Force. And as I've learned through my career, you get to know most of the people in your era of the Air Force, your kind of 3-year chunk as you go through your career. The benefit that the British students that come here will have is that they'll know that chunk of people in the German Air Force and the Italian Air Force and the Danish Air Force, and they'll bump into them on exercises. And when they pick up the telephone, to phone in NATO CAOP or to conduct some mission planning on a large air operation, they might just know the person on the other end of the phone. I'll offer a couple of examples. So when I first walked into this building 3 years ago to start my training, one of the first instructors I flew with on my instructor workup was an American lieutenant colonel who was working in the NATO Operations Center in Italy when I was flying missions over Libya in 2011. And, over a coffee post-flight, we chatted about that, and we realized we were in the same place at the same time and doing the same mission. And then another of my course mates, a Dutch F-16 pilot, was somebody that I'd met on Exercise Frisian Flag when I was flying the Tornado a few years ago. So those relationships last throughout a career. And it's a huge benefit to the students coming through this system that they'll develop them here, and they get to learn about other nations as well. They get to learn culturally, but also they get professional knowledge of other NATO air forces as well, which is something that they'll have to learn through their career, but they just learn it organically here rather than having to force themselves to go and learn in the UK.
So the operation here at Shepherd is huge. Can you just explain a little bit about that in terms of how large the wing is, the number of squadrons, the number of aircraft, and also from a practical perspective, how does that manifest itself in terms of the airspace and everything else?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the scale of daily operations here is incomparable to anything else I've ever experienced. The only parallel I would draw would be Exercise Red Flag, which is held at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. We launch a similar amount of aircraft in a similar time here. The difference being that Red Flag is a small chunk of time that happens throughout the year, but it doesn't happen day in, day out. So every hour we're launching 15 to 20 sorties from Shepherd Air Force Base, and that happens 9 to 10 hours a day. So the scale is huge. That provides benefits, obviously, in terms of the amount of students that can be put through the program here. So we aim to train, or we do train, broadly 200 students a year through the whole program. And this has to be seen through the lens of the United States Air Force, where they have 3 other bases all doing similar numbers. So, but just looking at Shepherd, it's about 200 people per year. It makes it a machine. A new course will arrive every 6 weeks, and one will graduate every 6 weeks. So, developing a close relationship and an understanding with the students can be a challenge because they just come and go so quickly. And for the students themselves, they're operating in a system and an airspace structure which is very busy. It's not unusual to have a 10 to 12 aircraft operating in the visual pattern at any time. So, 4 ships departing, 4 ships recovering to initial, and multiple aircraft operating in and around the airfield. It's a challenge, but that's a good thing because it gets the students used to operating in that dense, congested environment. We spend a lot of time teaching them and coaching them through the process of building situational awareness, as we call it. So building that mental image of where they are in space and time and how they are interacting with the things around them. And it's one of the big challenges that a student pilot graduating from, flying a small light aircraft at 90 knots to flying a fighter type aircraft at 400 knots has to get their head around. It's the being able to think rather than in distance, think in time, think where am I 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes down the road? What implication does that have for me? One of the other challenges here in terms of the kind of density and complexity is our proximity to both Dallas-Fort Worth metro area and Oklahoma City. So to compare it to the United Kingdom, where I used to instruct on the Hawke Valley, we would fly our instrument practice diversion sorties to the Isle of Man or areas like that to fly an instrument approach. Here we'll fly to the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, where it's safe to say the traffic congestion is slightly different to the Isle of Man. There's downsides to it as well. The system here, due to the size and complexity, has a little less flexibility than the UK, because we're launching, on my squadron, we're launching 4 aircraft every 15 minutes. If you don't make your takeoff time or your step time or the weather impacts, you get cancelled. There's little ability to react on a kind of line-by-line basis as there is in the UK, where we have a little bit more flexibility. And that as I'm kind of meandering off a little, but linking into other differences, the weather is probably one of the most notable differences here. You might think that learning to fly in poor weather is a barrier, but I see it as a benefit that we don't have here as much as we do in the UK. So if I think back to my experience in flying training, some of the sorties on which I learned the most was when the weather made it difficult. And obviously, the more learning I'm doing, the more it's helping me to become a good pilot. The weather in North Texas is pretty binary. It's either lovely or it's bad to the extent where we can't go flying because there's a thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning or there's a foot of snow on the ground. So it's one of the larger detractors to the system here is the lack of challenge that comes from poor weather. The flip side to that is it makes it much easier for us to deliver pilots on time and as planned without having to use additional sorties because of unexpected poor weather. Something so there's pluses and minuses to both sides of it.
Tell me a little bit about the aircraft you train on.
I fly the Northrop T-38 Charlie. It's a development of the original T-38, which was designed in the 1950s. And the design brief of this was to come up with a two-seat training aircraft which would go supersonic. At the time, that was pretty much the cutting edge of available technology in terms of engines and airframe. I would compare it to the Tornado. So the Tornado, which I used to fly, had a very specific design brief. The Tornado was designed to deliver a weapon onto an airfield at low level and in poor weather or at night. The T-38 was designed essentially to go supersonic over and above everything else. Both those aircraft have very different philosophies, but because of the very single-minded nature of the design, they come with a lot of compromises. So that it's safe to say the T-38 is now outdated aerodynamically. If you compare it to an F-16 or an F-18, or in training terms, a Hawk or the Macchi 346 the Italian Air Force fly, it is outdated aerodynamically. That said, it is a challenging aircraft to fly well, so the students flying it have to work very hard to get the most out of it. It's a comfortable aeroplane to fly. It's not a challenging aeroplane to fly basically, but it's a hard aeroplane to fly well. So the students have to be on their game. It developed very good pure flying skills to be able to perform the aeroplane well. Around 25 years ago, the T-38A, the original model, became the T-38C. That brought with it mainly avionic improvements. So if you think A model is the 1960 standard of analog gauges, the C model moved this broadly into the kind of 2000s era. So digital avionics. A lot of it was essential to allow what is obviously an old aeroplane to operate in the modern airspace structure. But it also brought training benefits. So we now have a head-up display, which is replicated on an F-16 head-up display. But one of the big benefits that came with the upgrade is the debrief facility as well. So it gave us a very complex data-heavy debrief ability, which, because of the intensity of flying the aircraft, a lot of the learning takes place in the debrief, and that adds huge benefit, because rather than having to take notes and try to explain to a student how they made an error and why something may have happened, you can now show them in 3 dimensions in multicolor why, when they did X, Y was the result of it, and why things might not have gone so well for them. The United States Air Force and ENJJPT within that is gearing up to the replacement for the T-38, which is the Boeing T-7. That's about 10 years away from coming to ENJJPT at the moment. So it's the T-7's currently undergoing the initial flight trials at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And it will start to be accepted into Air Education Training Command in the USAF in the next kind of 3 to 5 years. But obviously then it will have to be grown and the syllabus developed. T-7 will bring a step-changing capability to ENJJPT. If you imagine the capability that the Royal Air Force has with the Hawk T2, the big notable difference between the Hawk and the T-38 being the Hawk, with its high-speed data link, has the ability to present the student with something that appears like a radar, so we can do much more modern tactical maneuvering. The T-7 will be a step change above the Hawk, so it's another generation forward in its capabilities.
Good. And a little bit about Texan.
ENJJPT, here we operate the T-6A Texan, which is the original, as it's implied, the original version of the Texan. And as I was talking about with the T-38, with the T-6A, we're not fully in the kind of in the analog instrument era, but we're kind of halfway between there and the modern digital kind of age. That's the big difference between what the Royal Air Force operate and what we operate here. So in at home in the UK, the T6 Charlie has a kind of full-up 3-screen digital display suite, whereas we are here on the T6A, we're somewhat behind that. There is a suite of upgraded avionics to come in the next 2-3 years, which will move the T6A on a little bit, but it won't get it fully to the capability that we have in the UK. That said, it's not a barrier to teaching what we teach here on the T6, because it is basic flying training. It is very much stick and throttles. This is how an aeroplane flies and works. And there's the potential argument that you could make that presenting too much information to the student too early could be detrimental to their learning. And actually, what we want them to do is just learn to fly the aeroplane at the most basic level before we start loading them up with different data sources and displays, etc.
And what's it like living in Texas?
I compare southern Oklahoma, which we're obviously close to, being 10 miles up the border in North Texas, as America's version of East Anglia, as somebody that used to be posted to Tamara, and that's how it feels to me. There's a lot of fields and a lot of flatness, whereas here it goes on for 500 miles rather than the 50 miles of East Anglia. One of the huge benefits of Shepherd is Wichita Falls, the town in which Shepherd Air Force Base lies, is very much a military town. ENJJPT and the 80th Flying Training Wing is actually a lodger unit at Shepherd. The 82nd Training Wing is the host unit here, which delivers trades training to the United States Air Force. So this is the USAS version of RAF Cosford, where their junior engineers come to learn how to maintain and service aircraft. And the footprint of that organisation is much larger than the 80th Flying Training Wing. Shepherd is a huge contributor to the local economy, and we're made to feel very welcome by the local population here. There's all of the countries at ENJJPT have a country sponsor, which is somebody from the local community who welcomes us into their community, and they help us out with everything from where to open a bank account when we arrive to hosting us for Thanksgiving and showing us a little bit of American culture. One of the other huge benefits of being here is the opportunity to travel as well. So, I wouldn't say we're close to anywhere, but we're not a long way from anywhere either. And most of even the students who, they're here for 18 months, and it's a very intense 18 months, they still take the time to get away to the mountains to go skiing, get down to the Gulf of Mexico to sit on the beach. And at least personally, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about my nearly 3 years here now is the opportunities it's given me to visit parts of the US that I wouldn't necessarily have visited if I hadn't lived here. So a lot of Brits will go to California and Florida on their holidays, but I would imagine that less people go to Arkansas or North Dakota, and those are the places that I really enjoyed visiting to see what is on one hand, a very similar culture and place, but on another hand is quite notably different from home.
So there are differences between the system you have here at Shepherd and, say, RAF Valley. Does that create a different output, a different student, a different pilot? And if so, how do you redress that?
Yes and no. There are technical differences. There are things which are in the syllabus here which aren't at Valley and vice versa, which result in pure skills, either shortfalls or surfeits, depending on where the difference lies. But then I would suggest that there's also a slight ethos change as well, a kind of higher level change. One of the things which is impressed on the students very early here is the desire and the need to take command of their own training. And that comes right down to the individual flights that they fly. So the students are expected from a very early stage to show up to the brief, to present the instructor with the plan. And they're not hand walk through it. They're expected to deliver every day for themselves. That extends to the training as well. So they are, they're signposted to where they need to go and read into things, but they're not walked through everything. They're expected to go and work hard and study for themselves. So they come up here with a very, very good work ethic and the ability to manage their time and their training very well. There are shortfalls, one of which I already spoke about, the differences between the T-38 capability versus the Hawk. So the T-38 doesn't have any capability to deliver a synthesized radar. So the students aren't exposed to any what we would term beyond visual range engagements, i.e. using a radar to find and target another aircraft. This is specifically addressed in the UK, so on graduation, the students will go to RAF Valley to do a short synthetic course, so sim only, just to get some hands-on with the synthetic radar and the Hawk. So when they fly the Typhoon or the F-35, it's not the first time that they've been presented with that kind of data. But broadly, as we put more people through ENJJPT, we've got more data points to be able to compare. And though the aircraft are very different, the training environment in terms of the weather and the airspace and obviously the country are fairly different, actually the output seems to be fairly standardized. And I'm in touch through the HQ in the UK with the operational conversion units, the people that deliver the next stage of training on the Typhoon and the F-35. And generally what we're hearing is that the ENJJPT graduates do just fine when they get back to the UK. It's an unusual situation because for most of the student officers that come through here, they've been in the Air Force, around 5 years, some slightly more than that. And they'll have done most of their training and spent a lot of their time embedded in a different Air Force. So actually one of the largest things for them to readjust to is life on an RAF station. And they will be more used to the phrases and terms and organizations and people in the United States Air Force and in the Royal Air Force. So it's not something that specifically requires top-up training. It just, with exposure and time, they'll amalgamate back into the system. But it's definitely something for the students to contend with when they go back to the UK, is just the little subtle differences between how the United States Air Force work and how the Royal Air Force works.
So if you could sum up ENJJPT in a short sentence, what would it be?
Building partnerships, training fighter pilots. That's what ENJJPT is here to do.
I was intrigued to find out the US perspective on ENJJPT and the benefits the international program delivers, so I couldn't leave without speaking with the boss, former F-15 Eagle pilot, Colonel Mitch Koch.
So I'm Colonel Mitch Koch. I'm currently the Deputy Wing Commander for the 80th Flying Training Wing. I started out here as a pilot training student after commissioning from the Air Force Academy in 2000. Starting in 2001, I began training here and then completed in February of 2002. So my background is flying F-15Cs. I flew a few different assignments, and then in and out of that aircraft, I also taught Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals in a few different locations. And that's the follow-on program after we wing a student before we send them to their fighters, the basics of how to dogfight and how to go to the range and drop bombs. So I flew Eagles at Mountain Home Air Force Base and also in Okinawa, in Japan there. And then I've been on and off staff positions as well. I've gone to school with the Army at Fort Leavenworth as a major, and then again as a lieutenant colonel at the Naval War College. And I've had a few different staff assignments, one of them in Korea and another one in Alaska. I arrived here last summer, so I've been in the seat since July of 2023.
So you're clearly testament to this product that comes out of Shepherds.
Interestingly, of all the places, in 24 years of service, I've moved almost every 1 or 2 years, and I've never gone back to the same base except for this one. So I started out here. I spent 4 years here teaching Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals and was a squadron commander in the Lucky Devils, the 88th Fighter Training Squadron. And so I feel very fortunate to be back here again.
So can you provide an overview of the 80th FTW, please?
80th Flying Training Wing is the organization that runs the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program. ENJJPT started in 1982 officially here, but Shepherd Air Force Base and the 80th Flying Training Wing has been training international partners since the 1960s. But the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program is a 55-week program that starts in Phase 1, basically academics and simulators. Then after Phase 1, they go to the flight line and they fly in T6s. And we teach them the basics of how to take off and land, how to do aerobatics in the airspace, emergency procedures. And then we do a phase that covers instruments. We do a lot of out and backs across countries. We do some nights. And we do formation flying as a two-ship. We can do some advanced formation flying where we do tactical formations as well. And a few introductions that will get them ready for T-38s and Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. And then lastly, we do a low-level navigation phase, which starts out single ship and then finishes up as a two-ship low-level navigation. So that's essentially Phase 1 and 2. That's about a 6-month process. And when they're done with that, they go and do very similar things in the T-38 as well. So now they're doing those things in an aircraft that flies faster and has afterburning jet engines. When those 55 weeks are over, we'll put wings on their chest, and for those going on to fly fighters, which is the vast majority of our graduates, many of them will go here for Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, which is about a 3 to 4 month course where we teach them the basics of how to dogfight, how to go to the range and drop bombs, and most importantly, how to think and act like a fighter wingman.
What are the benefits of the international construct?
Yeah, the really great thing about being here is, first of all, we got a lot of different instructor pilots with a lot of different experience from different backgrounds, and they bring a wealth of knowledge and information to us. And as we know, a lot of our nations are hurting in terms of providing sufficient numbers of experienced instructor pilots back into the pilot training enterprise. And ENJJP brings a lot of those folks back, and a lot of them have a lot of experience as well, which makes for really good instruction. In fact, we just had our unit effectiveness inspection, which is a higher headquarters inspection every 2 years, and that inspection identified one of our strengths in comparison to other pilot training bases was the expert instruction. And we attribute a lot of that to the international partners who bring that experience to our program. Another thing is just the foundation that gets laid and the relationships that get built that we can bring back to flying in the combat air forces. We've seen things where in Europe, for example, we've had contingencies where we had to get aircraft up into the air quickly, and we didn't have an opportunity to pre-coordinate on the ground ahead of time. And the pilots are meeting in the air, coordinating and able to make it happen. And a lot of that we attribute to the foundation that was laid in international programs like this, where we have the same baseline and the shared understanding. Examples of that happened in Odyssey Dawn with Libya. And we've heard stories too from some of our partners who attribute the ability to get combat air patrols when Russia invaded Ukraine up very quickly as a result of some of that shared understanding.
How have training syllabi changed in recent years to take account of both synthetic training and fifth-gen technology?
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to optimize our training and to make it more efficient and more effective. And so we've done a number of things. One of them is virtual reality headsets that we can give to students that have programs on it to show them what it's like to do ground ops and walk around the aircraft, what it's like to fly different maneuvers, how to do aerobatics in the airspace. And so the students can take that home and review that and chair fly by seeing it and thinking about it first and getting a good demo before they even step in the aircraft or a simulator. And as a result, they're more efficient and more effective when they fly. Additionally, we have simulators, which we've had for years, but now we've integrated immersive technology. So we have virtual reality sims as well that give the students the ability to do multiple repetitions and multiple attempts at something without somebody necessarily always looking over their shoulder. And they can practice in their off time, and they can practice things that they need to work on, particularly before they go and step back into a graded simulator or into an aircraft again. And so we've got different events, some of them required by the syllabus and some of them optional, interspersed throughout our syllabus to help make them more effective students.
And what other changes have you seen from 20 years ago to when you've come back?
Well, the simulators are a whole lot better. Now we've got 360-degree views that we can use with incredible graphics compared to what I had at the time, which were just round dials that changed and moved. And I've also seen us download a lot of things from higher-level syllabi to lower-level syllabi to introduce new topics to students earlier than they normally would have. So when I went through as a student, we only had single-ship low-level stories as our last block, and now we're doing that as a two-ship and already teaching them how to think as a two-ship flight lead or a two-ship wingman in the T6 phase. We've downloaded something called Heat to Guns, where it's the initial moves of a dogfight into T-38s, which was formerly something we didn't introduce until Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, so one step earlier. And the same thing for tactical formation and four-ship formation in T6s in their phase 2, which is something that the other U.S. pilot training bases don't do yet, but we're seeing benefits in terms of introducing students to that before they get to T-38s.
Have you got any personal experiences of coalition operations where you've operated with some of the countries that are training here?
Me personally, I have only done exercises in that situation. So I spent some time in Iceland sitting, doing combat air patrol and looking for Russian aircraft that were coming over through our ADAs. But I was able to take off with a tanker and go do an exercise in Scotland, land at Lukers for a night, then take off and go back. And again, operating with coalition aircraft during that short exercise. And again, the shared baseline that we all have for flying and rules and understanding air combat made that possible.
So one final question for me, and that is, what do you think US students benefit from the multinational nature of NJEPs?
First of all, US students understand a culture that's outside of their own, and it gives them a much broader perspective, and that's really important in a world that's as globalized as ours. Second of all, they get experience and instruction from people who have had other experiences in coalition operations other than just what maybe some of the U.S. folks would have had, or some of our first assignment instructor pilots have not experienced. And additionally, they make and build relationships that last for a lifetime. We've heard stories of general officers who had classmates in pilot training here at ENJJPT who were able to coordinate with each other and make things happen that might have been much more difficult as a result. ENJJPT is really unique in a phenomenal program because not only is it an international program with international participants, but it's also internationally managed. So it's not a U.S. program where the U.S. gets to decide what happens and other countries pay to join it. It's a program where 14 nations join together to decide how to fund the program, how to run the program, and what's going to happen next. And the U.S. is just one of 14 nations making those decisions. And that's a really unique aspect. And as a result, we have international instructor pilots weaved in within our leadership structure. So we have squadron commanders and a group commander who are all international as well. And I think that really speaks to the multinationally run portion of this program, which makes it very unique.
I have to say it's been a real privilege to visit Shepherd. I've been struck by a real sense of purpose here. Not only through the people I've met, but also by simply walking around the NJEPS building. Whether instructors have flown Hornets, Fighting Falcons, or in the case of one RAF instructor, the Westland Wessex, this is one team which reflects the very essence of NATO. And one final note, RAF pilots coming to the US, and Texas in particular, is nothing new. In World War II, as Britain struggled to train sufficient aircrew, Prime Minister Winston Churchill made an urgent plea to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt for materiel and pilot training. The passing of the Lend-Lease Act by Congress in May 1941 allowed the US to provide war supplies to any nation deemed vital to the defence of the United States. This paved the way for the construction of 7 British flying training schools, the first and largest of which was established in Terrell, to the east of Dallas. By the end of the war, more than 2,200 RAF and United States Army Air Corps cadets earned the wings at this school. Today, those days are not forgotten. A dedicated group of local Texans keep the memory of a little-known chapter of World War II history alive, with a superb museum which details not only the history of the No. 1 British Flying Training School, but also the close ties with the local population. As Museum Executive Director Patrick Hotard explained.
Yes, it was quite the unique experience for a lot of people to have a large number of British visitors at one time here in town for that training purpose. And so the thing that's very unique is how people who can remember the school, many of whom have passed on now, of course, they talk such fondly about the relationship that the locals had with these British cadets and how fond they were of them. One cadet, Henry Madrick, came back and lived here and eventually became mayor of the city of Terrell. So there was a very strong bond that developed between these cadets. They were here for 6 months, more or less, during their training program. So they really became very sort of imbued into the local populace during their time here.
This is Reheat for Inside Air, where we take a look at some of the stories you might have missed. I'm AS1 Emma Kerwin. An Atlas aircraft from RAF Brize Norton has carried out another vital airdrop of aid directly to the people who need it in Gaza. The Atlas made the 10th operational drop with 12 bundles filled with pre-packaged halal meals, water, flour, rice, tin food and sweets. All of the aid landed safely. 140 Expeditionary Air Wing have deployed 3 RAF Typhoons to Finland to support exercise Swift Response in Estonia. 50 RAF personnel deployed from Romania to Tikakoski Air Base as part of NATO's largest exercise since the Cold War. Flight Lieutenant Charles says it was part of Exercise Steadfast Defender.
So Swift Response has been part of a major UK land exercise, and we've been the air component to that. So we've been flying from here in Finland to provide close air support in the overhead of the training areas in Estonia.
The RAF Typhoons have since returned to NATO air policing duties in Romania after taking part in Exercise Swift Response. An RAF Poseidon was diverted from an agile combat employment exercise on the 25th of April for a search and rescue mission over the Firth of Clyde after being tasked by HM Coast Guard in Belfast. It located survivors of a fishing vessel and provided overwatch of the life raft while the RNLI rescued the crew. And Corporal Axe has made his professional boxing debut. He joined the RAF aged 18 and is now an instructor at the Fire Service College on the Defence Fire Training Unit. He says his role as a firefighter and his boxing complement one another because both require a high level of physical fitness. That was Reheat for Inside Air.
Cheers, Emma. And now it's time to find out who's under the hat with Ben.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
Flight Lieutenant Chris Williams, known as Chris, and occasionally CW.
What's your profession?
I'm legacy personnel, PERS training and PERS PED. There's not many of us about now, and I'm based at the Directorate of RAF Sport at RAF Hull.
What's the best thing about your job?
I really enjoy getting out and about and seeing how personnel play sport, both at the elite level and the grassroots level, and I'm lucky enough to get across to them all.
Hardest part of your job?
It's probably finding the time to visit each association. We have 54 associations with 88 subdisciplines, so we're kept really busy for a small team of 6.
Best location you've served?
That's 20 Squadron Harrier, OCU at RAF Wittering. I was lucky enough to get a couple of backseat flights in the T10s. Unbelievable experience while I was there for 3 years.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
I'm totally lost without music these days, so iPad and headphones.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
Graduating from RTS in 99 and then IOT at Cranwell in 2010. Probably on a par with each other.
Thank you, Flight Lieutenant Williams, for helping us sprint over the line in another episode of Under the Hat.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review. It does help boost us up the rankings. Subscribe via your favourite podcast app and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.